Chapter 12: The British Empire, the Archetype of Global Overextension and the Post-Imperial Reset. The British Empire represents the most ambitious, complex, and structurally sophisticated imperial project in human history. It was vast across geography, intricate in administration, advanced in technology, and disciplined in institutional culture. Its achievements were extraordinary: global trade networks, industrial revolution leadership, naval dominance, administrative innovations, and a legal tradition that shaped dozens of modern states. Yet its decline followed the same structural arc observed in all other empires: capability concentration enabling expansion, complexity rising faster than capability could scale, erosion of institutional quality, acceptance of lower standards, and eventual contraction to a size that matched the society's true capacity. If Rome is the archetype of ancient collapse and China the archetype of civilizational senescence, Britain is the archetype of modern imperial overextension, an empire whose vast complexity required a capability base no nation could indefinitely sustain. The British rise began not through territorial ambition but through maritime commercial capability. Britain's maritime class, sailors, shipwrights, merchants, and navigators, accumulated technical and practical skill unmatched in Europe. Combined with financial institutions like the Bank of England, joint stock companies, and insurance markets, this created an ecosystem of high capability concentrated in a small island. The state could draw from a deepening pool of literate workers, engineers, and administrators cultivated by the early Industrial Revolution. Crucially, Britain also developed relatively efficient political institutions, parliament, common law, and an expanding civil service that rewarded competence and constrained arbitrary authority. This institutional framework allowed Britain to mobilize resources, enforce contracts, and coordinate long-distance operations with a level of reliability uncommon in pre-modern history. The empire that emerged during the 18th and 19th centuries was not an accidental accumulation of colonies, but an increasingly integrated administrative system. Britain controlled territories across the Americas, Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. It governed these lands through an elaborate machinery of governors, magistrates, civil servants, military officers, commercial agents, engineers, and educators. The empire relied on an astonishingly small number of administrators relative to the size of its territories. In India, only a few thousand British officials governed hundreds of millions of people. This was possible because of one of the most selective bureaucratic pipelines in history: the Indian Civil Service examination system. Candidates faced multi-day written exams in law, economics, classics, and languages, with failure rates often exceeding 90%. This produced an elite administrative class of exceptional capability density, a modern echo of China's imperial examinations and the Ottoman Divserm. This concentration of capable individuals enabled Britain to build the world's most complex imperial system. But it also created a structural vulnerability. The empire depended on a continuous supply of highly capable administrators, officers, and specialists, far more than any single nation could reliably produce over the long term. As the empire expanded during the 19th century, the demand for competent operators grew faster than the domestic population could supply them. At the same time, capability requirements kept rising. Railways, telegraphs, steamships, industrial-scale logistics, modern banking, and large bureaucratic structures demanded administrators far more skilled than their predecessors. The empire became a machine requiring constant elite human capital inputs just to function. During the Victorian and Edwardian High Period, Britain met this demand through strong educational institutions and cultural incentives that valorized imperial service. The Indian Civil Service and Colonial Service recruited through rigorous examinations. The Royal Navy and Army enforced strict training standards. Elite families still channeled their sons into imperial careers. Capability density remained just high enough to sustain the system, though even at its peak, the empire was under strain. The cracks became visible in the late 19th century. The Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, exposed alarming weaknesses in British military competence. Small-bore commandos repeatedly outmaneuvered British forces. Logistics failed. Officer quality was inconsistent. Casualties shocked the public. Britain ultimately prevailed, but only through overwhelming resources rather than institutional excellence. The war triggered major military reforms because it revealed an uncomfortable truth: Britain's institutions no longer matched the complexity they were expected to operate. At the same time, British society urbanized and diversified. Education expanded, but average quality declined as access widened. Elites increasingly pursued careers in finance, industry, and the professions rather than imperial administration. Fertility among the upper and middle classes fell, a pattern identical to Rome's senatorial decline and China's elite bottlenecks. The capability pipeline narrowed even as administrative demand grew. The empire responded by lowering standards. The civil service expanded but diluted meritocratic rigor. Colonial administrators were increasingly drawn from socially connected families with weaker academic backgrounds. Military recruitment broadened to include individuals with lower discipline and training. The system still functioned, but with declining precision and reliability. Simultaneously, complexity accelerated. Nationalism spread. Technology advanced rapidly. Geopolitical rivalry intensified. Administering India in 1900 required far more capability than in 1800. Governing Africa demanded ethnographic, linguistic, and economic expertise unknown to earlier administrators. Britain attempted to compensate by training colonial subjects and promoting local elites. This improved short-term governance but strengthened nationalist movements, accelerating political fragmentation, another example of a system solving one problem while creating another. World War I delivered a direct capability shock. British junior officer casualty rates were among the highest in Europe. A generation of the empire's future administrators, engineers, politicians, and military leaders died in the trenches. This was not merely a military loss. It was a human capital catastrophe. The interwar years showed the damage clearly: bureaucratic performance slowed, strategic vision weakened, and institutional discipline eroded. World War II delivered the terminal stress test. Britain mobilized heroically but emerged exhausted, indebted, and demographically depleted. The post-war state inherited a system far too complex for its diminished capability base. Demographic decline, educational dilution, and wartime losses combined to produce an irreversible mismatch between system complexity and operator competence. Decolonization was therefore not merely moral or ideological. It was structural necessity. Britain could no longer govern a global empire because it lacked the capability. Administrative machinery required to manage dozens of territories exceeded what the post-war state could supply. This reality was brutally confirmed during the Suez Crisis, 1956. Britain attempted to act like a global power, intervening militarily to assert imperial authority. The result was humiliation. Under financial pressure from the United States, Britain was forced to withdraw. The episode proved conclusively that Britain no longer possessed the capability to behave as an empire, regardless of political will. The post-imperial reset followed. Britain contracted to a scale consistent with its real capability density. Freed from global governance, the state refocused on domestic administration. A smaller, less complex system emerged that the shrinking capability base could sustain. This is the same structural correction seen after Rome, China, Spain, and the Ottomans. The system contracts to match reality. Britain's imperial arc provides a warning for modern states. As populations age, fertility declines, and education expands without increasing competence, the capability, complexity mismatch reemerges. As governments regulate finance, healthcare, immigration, technology, welfare, infrastructure, and global obligations, they again require high-skill operators. If the capability pipeline shrinks, the same pressures appear: lowered standards, bureaucratic friction, corruption risk, slower decision-making, and declining strategic vision. The British Empire is therefore the clearest modern demonstration of the core law: institutional excellence can build vast systems, but no society can indefinitely sustain complexity beyond its capability base. Britain did not collapse. It contracted. It returned to a scale consistent with its structural capacity. In the next chapter, we turn to the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, another giant whose collapse, though different in ideology, obeys the same mechanical laws of capability and complexity.